The carriage lurched to a halt, but Augusta did not move. Outside the rain-streaked window, the granite face of a London townhouse loomed, its windows dark eyes in the grey afternoon. Stratton House. The name was a weight in the city's mouth, a place of silent grief and sharp edges, a place of tests. For a long-held breath, she simply watched the water trace paths down the glass, each droplet a tiny, fleeting world. Inside that house were two children who had not smiled in a year, a duke who had not been seen to grieve at all, and two enormous dogs who had, by all accounts, appointed themselves the arbiters of all who entered. They will not have you," her aunt's voice echoed in her memory, crisp and cutting as shattered glass, a plain, penniless companion. "The dogs will see the truth of you before the Duke even bothers to look at the truth of you." She closed her eyes. The truth was that she was tired. The truth was that the damp had settled in the worn wool of her traveling cloak, and she could feel the chill of it in her bones. The truth was that this was not a beginning, but an end. The end of hoping for anything more than a dry room and a quiet life. This was a bargain, a piece of human architecture as cold and formal as the house before her. To understand how Augusta Finch had come to be sitting in a fine carriage before such a door, you must understand the life she was leaving behind. A life measured in the sips of her aunt's lukewarm tea and the endless silent mending of lace she was never permitted to wear. 3 weeks earlier, life had been a much smaller, meaner thing. It was the scent of beeswax and old paper, the perpetual chill of a drawing room where the fire was never built high enough, and the constant low-grade ache of being invisible. Augusta was the companion to her aunt, Lady Honoria Plumtree, a woman whose charity was as thin and sharp as her nose. It was a life of small, curated humiliations. Augusta arranged the flowers, but was chastised for the extravagance of a single open rose. She read aloud from the papers, but was instructed to skip the interesting parts. She was in the starkest terms, furniture that could be commanded to fetch a shawl. That afternoon was no different. She was on her knees, pinning a loose hem on a gown for her cousin, Beatrice, who was to be presented at court. Beatrice, all milk and roses, sighed dramatically from the chair where she sat, a novel open on her lap. "Do be careful, Augusta. This is lion silk. One cannot simply get another." I am aware," Beatrice Augusta said, her voice even, her fingers nimble and sure, worked the tiny stitches, hiding them in the seam. She did not look up. Looking up invited comment, on the smudge of ink on her cheek, or the stray wisp of her sensible brown hair. It was easier to focus on the task, on the small, manageable world of thread and needle. Lady Honoria swept into the room, a rustle of taffeta and disapproval. Still at it. "The girl will have a birthday before that gown is fit to be seen. Augusta, your stitches are serviceable, but they have no art." "No flair." Augusta said nothing. Her art was not in flair, but in endurance. Her stitches would hold. That was their only virtue, and the only one she was permitted. The Duke of Stratton's father is coming to call," Lady Honoria announced, preening slightly. He has taken a decided interest in Beatrice." Beatrice brightened, sitting up straighter at the old Duke. "But why?" "Why?" Lady Honoria laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Because his son, the new Duke, is a grief-stricken block of ice, who has refused to see any eligible girl for a year. The old Duke, a man of sense, knows the estate needs an heir and the children need a mother. He is arranging introductions, and you, my dear, are at the top of his list." Beatrice flushed with pleasure. "Duchess," she whispered. Augusta's needle paused for a fraction of a second. The new Duke, Maxwell, Lord Stratton. A name whispered in drawing rooms with a mixture of pity and fear. His beautiful young wife had died in a fever the previous spring, leaving him with 2 small children, a title heavy with sorrow, and a house on a cliff that was said to be as cold as his heart. He had retreated from the world, and now the world, in the form of his own father, was trying to force its way back in. He is bringing his son with him, Lady Honoria added, her eyes gleaming. A brief visit to see you, Beatrice, in a domestic setting. So you will be charming. Augusta, you will serve the tea and then you will make yourself scarce. We cannot have you looking, well, like that, like that. The words hung in the air. Augusta finished her stitch and bit the thread cleanly. She rose from her knees, her back protesting the posture. A yes, Aunt Honoria. She did not want to be in the room. She did not want to witness Beatrice's practiced smiles or her aunt's grasping ambition. She wanted only the quiet of the kitchens, the company of the cook who sometimes saved her a warm roll, a small unspoken kindness in a house that counted every lump of sugar. But an hour later, she was there, carrying the heavy silver tray into the oppressive silence of the drawing room. The old Duke, the Dowager, was a stout man with a florid face and eyes that missed nothing. He was talking in a low, rumbling voice to Lady Honoria, but Augusta's gaze was drawn to the man standing by the window, his back to the room. The new Duke. He was tall, his shoulders broad under a perfectly tailored coat of dark gray superfine. He had not moved or spoken since their arrival. He simply stood, looking out at the London street as if it held more interest than the three women plotting his future behind him. "A tea, Your Grace?" Augusta asked, her voice quiet but clear. The old Duke turned, his eyes flicking over her, dismissing her in the same instant. Yes, the girl. Put it there." But the younger Duke turned from the window, and for the first time, Augusta saw his face. It was not the face of a grief-stricken romantic. It was the face of a man who had declared war on feeling and was, for now, winning. His features were clean and sharp, his jaw tight, his eyes a startling pale gray, like a winter sky. They were intelligent, weary, and utterly devoid of warmth. He was handsome, she supposed, in the way a marble statue is handsome, perfectly formed, and cold to the touch. He noticed things. His gaze did not slide over her as his father's had. It rested on her for a moment, taking in the worn cuffs of her dress, the careful way she balanced the heavy tray, the resigned set of her shoulders. He noticed the slight tremor in her aunt's hand as she reached for a cup. He noticed Beatrice's smile, pitched a shade too bright. He noticed her. And then he turned back to the window. My son is a particular," the old Duke was saying to Lady Honoria, his voice a stage whisper that was meant to be overheard. "The loss, you understand. He requires a woman of impeccable breeding, of course, but also of spirit, someone to bring life back to that mausoleum he calls a home." Beatrice leaned forward. "I adore children, Your Grace, and I am not at all afraid of a challenge." The Duke by the window made a sound. It was not a laugh. It was a short, sharp exhalation of breath, dry and utterly without humor. Maxwell," his father warned. The younger Duke turned fully. He let his gaze drift over Beatrice, a cool, assessing look that made her blush deepen. My father is a romantic, Lady Honoria. I am not. I require a duchess. The children require a governess who does not flee after a week. The house requires a mistress who can manage an accountant. These are facts, not challenges. "Do you like dogs, Miss Plumtree?" The question was so abrupt it startled everyone. Beatrice blinked. Dogs, Your Grace?" Yes, I have two. They are large. And they do not care for strangers. I am sure I would grow to love them," Beatrice stammered. The Duke's mouth tightened in a faint, mirthless smile. They are not known for returning the sentiment." He looked past Beatrice, past his father, and his eyes landed on Augusta again as she quietly began to gather the cups. "You," he said, the word a command. Augusta froze. You have been silent this entire time. Do you have an opinion on dogs?" All eyes in the room swiveled to her. Her aunt's face was a thundercloud of fury. Beatrice looked aghast. The old Duke looked merely curious. To be addressed directly, as if she were a person and not an animate piece of furniture, was a disruption of the highest order. Augusta placed a cup carefully back on its saucer. She met his gaze directly. He would see it. I have an opinion on all creatures, Your Grace. That they are honest in their affections. If a dog growls, it has a reason. One would do well to listen. A silence. Thick, shocked silence. A poor, gentle woman with opinions is a luxury no household can afford. Her aunt's words from long ago. The Duca's expression did not change, but something shifted in the depths of those winter-gray eyes. A flicker of interest. Or perhaps just surprise that the furniture had spoken. Ah, sensible answer, he said, his voice quiet. He turned to his father. Ah, this is a waste of time. Beatrice is not the one, Maxwell, the old Duke hissed. She is beautiful, and she is well-bred, and she will make some man a fine wife. She will not, however, survive a winter at Stratton. Nor will the children survive her. He gave a short formal bow. A Lady Honoria, Miss Plumtree. You will forgive me. My father can show himself out, and with that he was gone, leaving a trail of stunned silence and shattered ambition in his wake. Lady Honoria's face had gone from red to a mottled white. The moment the front door closed behind the two dukes, her fury erupted. How dare you!" she shrieked, turning on Augusta. How dare you speak, you, with your plain face and your insolent opinions? You have ruined everything." He was looking at her, and you spoke, and you ruined it. I only answered his question. Anta, Augusta said, her voice low. You will not enter your house as decoration. The words came back to her, an echo of a defiance she had not known she possessed. Sensible answer, Lady Honoria mimicked, her voice dripping with venom. He was mocking you, mocking us all. You are a fool, Augusta. A plain, bookish fool, and you have cost your cousin a duchy, the tirade went on. But Augusta barely heard it. She was thinking of the Duca's eyes. Not cold, she realized now, but guarded, walled off. And his question about the dogs. It was not a question, it was a test. A test Beatrice had failed, and a test she, unwittingly, had passed. The crime was that she had been chosen first. Not for her beauty, not for her name, but for a single honest sentence. And in her aunt's house, that was the most unforgivable sin of all. For 2 weeks, her life became a study in pointed exclusion. She was given the worst tasks, spoken to only in commands, and made to feel the full weight of her aunt's displeasure. Beatrice would not even look at her. Augusta retreated into herself, finding solace in the order of the mending basket and the quiet solitude of her small attic room. She had made a mistake. She knew she had drawn attention to herself. And attention, for a woman in her position, was always dangerous. She was darning a tablecloth one afternoon, the light from the single window fading when the summons came. A footman, his face carefully blank, informed her that a visitor had arrived for her, not for her aunt, not for Beatrice. Puzzled, she followed him downstairs, her heart a nervous drum against her ribs. Was she to be sent away with no reference? Cast out for the crime of speaking her mind? In the small, unused morning room, the old Duke was waiting. The Dowager Duke of Stratton, alone, Trasher. He stood, as she entered, a gesture of respect that so startled her she almost forgot to curtsy. Miss Finch," he said, his voice a low rumble. Please sit." She sat on the very edge of a stiff-backed chair, her hands folded in her lap. Your Grace. I do not understand. You have been on my Suna's mind?" the old Duke said, coming straight to the point. It is a rare thing for anything to be on his mind these days besides his own misery. You and your answer about dogs. Augusta felt a flush of heat creep up her neck. A fear I was impertinent. You were honest, he corrected. A commodity in short supply in this city. And in my Sona's life. He leaned forward, his hands on his knees, his expression serious. I will be blunt, Miss Finch. My son needs a wife. He has 2 children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, who have been running wild since she passed. They are good children, but they are heartbroken. They have driven off 3 governesses. My son Maxwell is a good man, but he is a terrible father right now. He is frozen. The entire estate is frozen in time, caught in the moment of her death. He paused, his gaze sharp. He needs a duchess. Not for society, not for show. He needs a partner, someone to help him thaw that house, someone to reach those children, someone strong enough to withstand the silence. Augusta could only stare. Your Grace, I am a poor companion. My aunt has made my position very clear. Your aunt is a fool, the Duke said dismissively. I have made inquiries, Miss Finch. Your father was a scholar. He left you with a good mind and a mountain of debts. You are clever. You are organized. You are, by all accounts, absurdly patient. And you are not afraid to speak the truth to a duke. He smiled. A genuine, weary smile. A rare and terrifying quality. He laid his proposition before her then, plain and stark, and utterly without romance. It was a business arrangement, a contract. Maxwell needed to marry before the end of the season. Certain trustees of his late wife's estate were making noise, suggesting the children were not being properly cared for, hinting that a guardian should be appointed. A stable marriage would silence them. He will not court you, Miss Finch. He will not woo you. He will likely not even speak to you more than is necessary. But he will give you a title. He will give you security beyond your wildest dreams. He will give you a home. And in return, you will give him your name, your steadiness, and your time. You will become the Duchess of Stratton. And you will, if you can, save his children. It was insane. It was a fairy tale told backwards, a nightmare dressed in silk. To be plucked from obscurity not for love, or even affection, but for sense. For being a sensible answer to a sensible question. Self-sufficient. The word for a horse that does not need to be fed. Why, me? She whispered the question she had been holding back. There are hundreds of women more suitable, because of the dogs, the old Duke said simply. My son trusts their judgment more than his own. He has had a parade of suitable women sent to Stratton over the last year. Beautiful, charming, accomplished women. The dogs, 2 of the most gentle beasts you could ever meet, have growled at every single one. Maxwell believes they smell falseness. He believes they smell ambition. He said of you, she did not try to please me. She simply told the truth. He believes the dogs will not growl at you. He sighed, a heavy, tired sound. It is on this flimsy, ridiculous hope that the future of my family now rests. So, Miss Finch, will you come to Stratton House for one night? Will you meet the children? Will you meet the dogs? It was a test, another one. Not for a duchy, not really, but for a life. Any life other than the one she was living. A life where she might be useful, not merely used. A life where her patience might build something, instead of just enduring. She looked at her own hands, resting in her lap. Hands that were chapped from harsh soap, with a needle prick on a thumb. Capable hands, honest hands. She lifted her chin and met the Duke's gaze. Yes, Your Grace, she said, I will. And so she found herself in the carriage, outside the silent stone house, the rain a soft drumming on the roof. She was leaving a life of quiet misery, for a life of grand, uncertain misery. But it was a choice, her choice, and that made all the difference. A footman opened the carriage door, a large black umbrella held aloft to shield her. Augusta took a steadying breath and stepped out. The air was cold, smelling of wet stone and coal smoke. She gathered her worn cloak around her and walked up the steps, her sensible boots making no sound on the slick pavement. The door swung open before she could reach for the bell. A butler, as old and gray as the house itself, stood there, his face an impassive mask. A Miss Finch, he said, his voice dry as dust. His Grace is expecting you. She stepped inside, and the world went silent. The hall was vast, a cavern of marble and shadow. A grand staircase swept upwards into darkness. Portraits of dead ancestors watched from the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow her. The air was frigid, not just with the damp of the day, but with a deeper, more profound chill. A house, holding its breath. It was a place where joy had been systematically extinguished. The fires were not lit, the curtains were drawn. It smelled of dust, and disuse, and a grief so heavy. It felt like a physical presence. Her entourage had been cold with meanness. This house was cold with sorrow. And then she heard it. The click of claws on marble. From the shadows at the top of the stairs, two shapes emerged. They were not dogs. They were legends. Two Irish wolfhounds, immense and shaggy, the color of smoke and storm clouds. They moved with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with their size, their heads low, their yellow eyes fixed on her. They were the hounds of myth, come to life to guard the gates of the underworld. The butler took an involuntary step back. A Cerberus Hades down, boys. His voice held a note of nervousness that did nothing to reassure her. The dogs ignored him. They descended the stairs, not with a rush, but with a slow, deliberate pace, their paws silent on the thick runner. They did not growl. They did not bark. They simply came, their gaze unwavering, their presence filling the cavernous hall until there was nothing else. Augusta stood her ground. She did not reach out. She did not speak. She remembered her own words to the Duke. If a dog growls, it has a reason. One would do well to listen. She would listen to their silence too. She simply stood, her hands at her sides, and let them approach. She was a guest in their house. It was for them to decide if she was welcome. They stopped a few feet from her, their heads on a level with her waist. They were even larger up close, their coats rough and wiry, their scent earthy and wild. They looked at her, and she felt as though she were being weighed and measured, not by a title or a fortune, but by something far more ancient and true. She met their gaze without fear, with only a quiet respect. She saw the intelligence in their eyes, the old sad wisdom of loyal creatures who had lost one of the people they loved. The larger of the two, Cerberus, took a step forward. He nudged her hand with his cold, wet nose. It was not a request to be petted, it was an inspection. He breathed in her scent, the smell of rain and wool and the faint lingering aroma of her aunt's lavender sachets. And then the moment stretched thin, he gave a great, gusty sigh, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of his huge chest. He lay down, not at her feet, but near them, his body collapsing onto the cold marble with a soft thud. The other dog, Hades, watched for another moment, then followed suit, curling up beside his brother. Two great gray mountains of fur guarding the entrance to the hall, guarding her. The silence that followed was different. The tension had gone out of it. The butler was staring, his mouth slightly agape. From the top of the stairs a voice spoke, cool and detached. Well, that is unexpected." Augusta looked up. The Duke, Maxwell, was standing there, leaning against the balustrade. He was dressed not in the formal attire of the afternoon, but in a simple white shirt, open at the collar, and dark trousers. He looked younger and somehow more weary without the armor of his coat. He had been watching the entire exchange. He descended the stairs, his steps measured. He did not look at her, but at the dogs. They have not done that for anyone," he said, his voice a low murmur. Not even for me, not at first." He stopped before her, close enough that she could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Those winter-gray eyes now held a flicker of something she could not name, not warmth, not yet, but a grudging, astonished respect. My father said you were sensible, Miss Finch. It appears my dogs find you acceptable. The question is, will my children?" Before she could answer, a small voice piped up from the shadows of the upper landing. "Are you the new one?" A little girl of about 6, with tangled blonde curls and a smudged face, peeked around a pillar. She was clutching a worn, headless doll. Eleanor, go back to your room," the Duke said, his voice hardening, but a boy, a little older, with his father's dark hair and serious eyes, appeared beside her. "A father sent for her. He said she might stay. I said she might visit Thomas," the Duke corrected, his tone sharp. There is a difference," the boy. Thomas looked not at his father, but at Augusta. His gaze was unnervingly direct, a Chilla's version of the Duke's assessing stare. He looked from her face, down to the two sleeping giants at her feet, and back up again. "Are they like you?" he stated. It was not a question. It was a fact. A strange and momentous fact in this house of sorrow. "Oh, it seems so," Augusta replied softly. The little girl, Eleanor, took a tentative step forward. Mama said they were good judges of character. The words were a perfect, practiced recitation, something she had been told many times. The Duke flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. It was the first crack Augusta had seen in his marble composure. The mention of his late wife was a wound, still raw. He had inherited more debts of feeling than of money, and had discharged both badly. "Ed, that is enough," he said, his voice strained. "Go with Mrs. Arma." Gable, a severe-looking woman in a gray dress, had appeared, hovering behind the children. The housekeeper. Her expression was a mixture of disapproval and suspicion. The children did not move. They continued to stare at Augusta, two small, solemn owls. Augusta knew this was the moment. This was the true test. Not the dogs, not the Duke, but these two small, heartbroken people. She could not win them with charm or treats. She could only win them with honesty. She curtsied a small, formal gesture, not to the Duke, but to his children. My name is Augusta Finch," she said, her voice gentle but clear. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Thomas, and you, Eleanor." She did not smile. A false smile would be another lie in a house already choking on unspoken truths. She simply looked at them and saw them. A boy trying to be the man of the house, and a girl clutching the ghost of a doll. Tomas's serious expression wavered. He seemed about to speak, but the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, intervened, herding them away with a series of sharp whispers. They went, but they both looked back over their shoulders at Augusta, at the strange woman who had tamed the hounds. When they were gone, the hall felt empty and vast again. You have survived the first encounter," the Duke said. His voice was flat, but she heard the undertone of surprise. "Most candidates are weeping by now." I am not a candidate, Your Grace," she said quietly. "I am here at your father's invitation. If you wish me to leave, you have only to say so." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and she saw a flicker of his father's bluntness. "I wished you to leave before you arrived. I wish every one of them to leave. My father does not listen. He thinks a new duchess is a poultice that will cure a broken leg. He is a fool. Loves you," Augusta said, the words out before she could stop them. "And he is afraid for your children." His eyes narrowed. You are impertinent, Miss Finch." "I am observant, Your Grace." "There is a difference." She used his own turn of phrase, a small, calculated risk. For a long moment, he was silent. He looked from her to the dogs, who had not stirred, and back again. A muscle worked in his jaw. He was a man cornered, not by enemies, but by the well-meaning machinery of his own life. Mrs. Gable will show you to your room," he said finally. His voice clipped and formal once more. Dinner is at 8. Do not be late." "I do not abide tardiness." It was a dismissal. He turned and walked away, towards a dark corridor that led to what she assumed was his study. A retreat. She had passed the test of the dogs. She had survived the first meeting with the children. She had not been dismissed out of hand by the Duke himself. It was not a victory, but it was not a defeat. She had stayed. The room Mrs. S. Gable showed her to was beautiful, opulent, and freezing cold. The bed was a vast continent of carved mahogany, hung with heavy velvet curtains that smelled of damp. A fire had been laid in the grate, but not lit. It was a room for a duchess, but it held no welcome. It was a stage set, waiting for an actress who knew her lines. Augusta walked to the window and pushed aside the heavy curtain. It looked out over a small, walled garden, now a tangle of winter-brown stalks and skeletal rose bushes. A place that had once been loved, now neglected, like the rest of the house, like the people in it. She thought of the bargain the old duke had offered: a title, security, a home, and in return, to light the fires in this house again, both literally and figuratively, to tame not just the dogs, but the grief. To coax life back into the neglected garden of a family. It was an impossible task. She should leave. She should tell the Duke she had made a mistake and return to the small, predictable misery of her aunt's house. There was a soft scratching at the door. Augusta turned, puzzled. She opened it to find Cerberus and Hades sitting patiently in the corridor. They looked up at her, their tails giving a slow, ponderous thump, thump against the carpet. She stepped back, and they padded into the room as if they belonged there. They circled the unlit hearth once, then Cerberus nudged a log with his nose, looking at her expectantly. It was so absurd, so utterly unexpected, that a laugh escaped her, a real, genuine laugh. The first in what felt like years. The sound was alien in the silent room. She knelt before the grate. Her hands, trained in 100 practical arts her aunt had deemed beneath her, were quick and efficient. She found the tinderbox, struck a flint, and soon a small, hungry flame was licking at the kindling. She added the larger logs, one by one, until the fire was crackling, spitting warmth and light into the chilly room. The dogs watched her, their yellow eyes reflecting the dancing flames. When she was done, she sat back on her heels. The warmth felt wonderful on her face. Cerberus nudged her hand again, this time a clear invitation. She hesitated for only a moment, then stroked his broad, rough head. His fur was wiry, not soft, but his devotion was a palpable thing. He leaned into her touch with a low groan of contentment. Hades rested, his heavy head on her knee, and so the Duke, Maxwell, found them an hour later. He had come to her door, his speech of dismissal prepared. He had decided this was a farce, another of his father's misguided schemes. He would send her away with a handsome payment for her trouble and tell his father the experiment had failed. He opened his mouth to knock, but the sound from within stopped him. The crackle of a fire, the sound of a woman humming, a low, tuneless melody, the kind of sound one makes when they are content and alone. He pushed the door open. The room was transformed. It was no longer a cold tomb, but a warm, living space. The fire blazed in the hearth, casting flickering golden light on the walls. And in the center of the light, sitting on the floor with her back against a chair, was Augusta. Her sensible brown hair was touched with firelight, making it gleam like polished chestnut. Her worn dress seemed, in this light, the color of warm earth, and at her feet, their great heads in her lap, his two monstrous, terrifying, loyal dogs were fast asleep. He noticed the mending basket beside her, a stocking pulled over a darning egg. He noticed the book lying open, not a novel but a dry-looking text on agricultural husbandry. He noticed the way her fingers moved in the ruff of Cerberus's neck, a slow, soothing rhythm. She had not made a grand gesture. She had not tried to redecorate or give orders. She had simply entered a cold room and made it warm. She had taken a house of sorrow and, in one small corner of it, had created a pocket of peace. He had come to send her away. He had inherited more debts of feeling than of money and had discharged both badly. But perhaps, just perhaps, this was a debt he could begin to repay. Augusta looked up, her humming ceasing. She was not startled, merely watchful. Your Grace." He stood in the doorway, a man caught between two worlds, the cold, grieving past and a future he had not dared to imagine. "I came to tell you to leave," he said, his voice raw with an honesty that surprised them both. She met his gaze, her own clear and steady, and now he looked at the sleeping dogs, the crackling fire, the quiet competence of her presence. He thought of his children, peering from the shadows. He thought of the endless parade of simpering, ambitious women his father had sent. None of them had lit a fire. None of them had earned the trust of his hounds. None of them had met his gaze with such unnerving calm. The joke was pretending I did not mean it. But he had not yet learned the joke. For now, he was still the man behind the wall. "A dinner is at 8, he said, his voice rough. And he turned and left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving her in the warm circle of light she had made. But men are slow, child, and dukes are slowest of all, and grief makes fools of the cleverest of us." He did not yet know that he was not closing a door on a problem, but opening a door to a solution. He thought he was observing an experiment. He did not realize he was witnessing a quiet miracle. Dinner was an ordeal of silent formality. It was served in a dining room that could have seated 40, but held only the three of them. The Duke at the head of the table, Augusta on his right, and an empty chair on his left, a ghostly presence that dominated the meal. The children apparently ate in the nursery. The food was exquisite, the silver gleaming, the crystal sparkling in the candlelight, but the silence was the main course. Augusta ate quietly, her manners impeccable. She was acutely aware of the Duca's gaze on her, not direct, but in quick, furtive glances. He was studying her, trying to understand how she had breached his defenses. She, in turn, studied him. She saw the way he held his wineglass, his knuckles white. She saw the tension in his shoulders. He was not a cold man. He was a man in agony, using coldness. His wit, the flashes of it she had seen, was not a sign of levity, but another layer of armor. After the meal, he led her, not to the drawing room, but to his study. It was the heart of the house. Unlike the rest of the house, this room felt lived in. A fire burned in the hearth. Papers were scattered across a massive desk, and a half-empty glass of brandy stood at his elbow. It was his fortress. He gestured to a leather armchair by the fire. "A sit," she sat. The dogs, who had followed them from the dining room, curled up on the rug between them, a bridge of gray fur connecting them. The Duke stood by the mantelpiece, one arm resting upon it. He looked down at the fire, not at her. My father offered you a bargain," he said, his voice low. He did, and you accepted. I agreed to come here. To meet you and your children. I have not yet accepted the bargain." He looked up at that, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You would refuse a duchy?" After seeing this, he gestured vaguely at the opulent room. This is a house, Your Grace, a beautiful house, but it is not a home." "Not yet," as she paused, choosing her words carefully. Before I answer anything, you will tell me the truth, all of it. I do not bargain with half a story." It was the bravest thing she had ever said. She was a penniless companion, and she was making demands of a duke. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. She expected anger, dismissal. Instead, after a long moment, he gave a short, humorless laugh of the truth. "A novel concept." He ran a hand through his dark hair. Very well, Miss Finch, you want the truth. The truth is my life is a shambles. The truth is my children are strangers to me. My son Thomas tries to be a little man, carrying the weight of the world on his 8-year-old shoulders. My daughter Eleanor has barely spoken since her mother died. She just clutches that wretched doll whose head Thomas broke in a fit of temper a month ago. His voice was flat, a recitation of facts. But Augusta heard the pain beneath it. The trustees of my late wife's estate, her uncle, specifically a circling. They say I am an unfit father, that the children should be made wards of the court, their inheritance managed by a more suitable a guardian. namely, him a marriage, a respectable and stable one, is the only thing that will hold them at bay. My father is right about that, at least. I have until the court's summer session. I need a wife by June. I need a wife by tomorrow. The words, unspoken, hung in the air. The deadline was real, and it was close. So, you see, Miss Finch, this is not a courtship. It is a business transaction. I need a signature on a marriage license. I need a warm body in the Duchess's pew at church. I need a shield. Augusta listened, her hands still. She heard everything he said, and everything he did not. He did not say he needed a mother for his children. He did not say he needed a companion for his lonely evenings. He spoke only of duty, of law, of shields. I see, she said quietly when he had finished. And what would be expected of this a shield? You would have the running of the house, a generous allowance, the protection of my name. You would be the Duchess of Stratton. In return, you would preside over my table, smile at my neighbors, and convince the world that this is a happy, stable home. He looked at her, his gray eyes bleak. You would be expected to live a lie. Augusta was silent for a long time, looking into the fire. The dogs sighed in their sleep. The old clock on the mantel ticked away the seconds. I will not live a lie, your grace, she said finally, her voice soft but firm. He stiffened. Then the bargain is unacceptable. The bargain, as you have stated it, is unacceptable, she corrected. But I will offer you a different one. She turned to face him, fully, and for the first time he saw not a plain, sensible companion, but a woman of formidable strength. I will be your wife. She said. Will give you my name and my presence. But these are my conditions. First, I will not be a shield. I will be a partner. Your problems with the trustees will become my problems. I will have access to all the accounts, all the correspondence. I have been told, very good with numbers. A faint, ironic smile touched her lips. My father taught me ledgers before he taught me poetry. His eyebrows rose. This was not in the script. A second, as she continued, pressing her advantage, I will have complete authority over the nursery and the children's education. Mrs. Gable may be an excellent housekeeper, but she is not their mother. They need kindness, more than they need discipline. She will resent you. I have spent my life being resented, your grace. I find I have developed a tolerance for it. The earned aphorism landed in the quiet room. He had no reply to that. A third, and this is not negotiable. We will not pretend this house is a house of grief. To paper it over with false smiles is an insult to your late wife, and a cruelty to your children. Her memory will be honored. Her portrait will remain. If Eleanor wishes to speak of her mother, she will be allowed to. If Thomas wishes to be angry at her for leaving, he will be allowed to. We will not erase her to make ourselves more comfortable. This was the blow that struck home. He visibly recoiled, his face pale. No one has dared. Then it is time someone did, Augusta said gently. A grief is not a disease, your grace. It is a wound. It must be cleaned and tended to be healed. Closing it up in a dark room only allows it to fester. She had one more condition, the hardest one. And finally, you will not ask me for affection. I do not feel, and you will not offer any. You do not possess. There will be no performance in public or in private. We will be partners, polite, respectful. If, in time, friendship grows between us, it will be a welcome bonus. But we will not begin with a lie. She had laid her terms on the table. She had offered him not a fantasy, but a stark, practical, and deeply compassionate reality. She had met his cold transaction and raised him a partnership of truth. Maxwell looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The plain girl from his Pythagoras list. The woman who had calmed his dogs and lit a fire. The woman who now sat before him, calmly rewriting the terms of his life. He had asked for a shield, and she had offered him a sword. And something more. She had offered him a path out of the darkness, a path paved not with denial, but with honesty. A seed of something he had long thought dead began to stir within him, not love, not desire, but hope. A terrifying, fragile thing. He walked to his desk and picked up a pen. He pulled a sheet of paper towards him. Your first condition, he said, his voice hoarse. Access to the accounts. You may begin tomorrow. He looked up, his gray eyes meeting hers across the room. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Finch. I know my own worth. Your Grace, she said, it is the one thing my aunt could not take from me. Augusta, he said, the name strange on his tongue. My name is Maxwell. It was an acceptance. The bargain was struck, not the one his father had envisioned, but a new one, a better one. She was to be the Duchess of Stratton, and the real work was about to begin. The days that followed were a blur of quiet industry and watchful waiting. Augusta, true to her word, did not attempt to become a duchess overnight. She became, instead, a quiet, steady presence in the cold house. She rose early, and her first act was always to go to the kitchens, not to give orders, but to speak with the cook, to learn the rhythms of the household, to ask about the children's preferences. She learned that Thomas liked his toast cut into soldiers, and that Eleanor had once loved strawberry jam before she had stopped loving anything at all. Her mornings were spent in the Duca's study, not with him, but with his ledgers. At first, Mrs. Gable had tried to bar her way, declaring that the study was his Grace's private domain. Augusta had simply looked at her, her expression calm, and said, His Grace and I have an arrangement. The books, please. Gable, her quiet authority was more effective than any shouting would have been. The ledgers appeared, and what she found in them was a story of methodical neglect. Bills paid late, investments untended, tenants or requests ignored. It was the financial record of a man who had lost interest in his own life. With meticulous care, she began to bring order to the chaos. She wrote letters, she made notes, she balanced accounts. Her mind, so long starved of any real challenge, rejoiced in the work. She was good at this. She was useful. Maxwell watched her from a distance. He would find her there, when he came down in the morning, her head bent over a ledger, a smudge of ink on her nose, one of the great dogs resting its head on her foot. She never looked up, never seemed to need his approval. She was a self-contained unit of competence. He had expected a duchess who would demand new gowns and plan parties. He had acquired an estate manager who wore drab wool and asked for more ink. It was baffling. And to his immense surprise, it was a profound relief. Her afternoons were for the children. She did not force her way into the nursery. She simply began taking her own tea in the small, forgotten conservatory that adjoined it. The place was a wreck, dusty and filled with dead plants. Augusta brought in a broom and a bucket. She cleaned the glass until it shone. She pruned the dead leaves from a hardy geranium that had somehow survived, and gave it water. She brought a book and sat in the single patch of pale winter sun, the dogs at her feet. The nursery door remained closed, but she knew they were watching. She could feel their eyes on her through the crack. On the third day, the door creaked open. Thomas stood there, his arms crossed, his expression defiant. That was Mama's place, he said, his voice accusing. Augusta looked up from her book. A buck. It is a lovely room, she said calmly. Deserves to have the sun in it. You're not meant to be here. Your father said I might take my tea where I please, she replied. She did not invite him in. She did not offer him a biscuit. She simply returned to her book. He stood there for a long time watching her ignore him. For a boy used to being the center of every adult's anxious attention, it was a new and unsettling experience. Finally, with a frustrated huff, he retreated back into the nursery. But the next day, the door was open a little wider, and she saw Eleanor peeking from behind her brother, her wide blue eyes fixed on the sleeping dogs. Augusta had brought a small basket with her. From it, She took a ball of dark wool and a set of knitting needles. She began to knit, her fingers moving with practiced speed. "Oh, what are you making?" The voice was so small, so rusty from disuse, that she almost did not hear it. It was Eleanor. She had stepped just outside the nursery door. Augusta did not stop knitting. "I am not sure yet," as she said. Sometimes you just have to start, and the thing tells you what it wants to be." Eleanor crept closer. She pointed a tiny, grubby finger at the headless doll she clutched. Can you make a head, Thomas?" "From the doorway," scoffed a donut. "Be stupid. You cannot knit a head." It was a sorry-looking thing, its cloth body, stained and worn. No," she said thoughtfully. You can knit a head. But I think I could mend a heart." She put down her knitting and looked at the doll properly. She looks like she was well-loved." Eleanor nodded, her lower lip trembling. Her name is Annabelle." Tomasa, he did not mean to. Augusta looked at Thomas, whose face had gone pale and miserable. She saw not malice, but a boyish, helpless rage against a world that had taken his mother. He hadn't broken the doll. He had been trying to break his own heart. I know," Augusta said softly. She held out her hand. May I?" Eleanor hesitated, then handed over the precious ruined thing. Augusta took it gently. She looked at the torn neck, the frayed edges. This is a job for a surgeon," she said with great seriousness. It will require very fine thread. And a new piece of linen for the face, and we will need to find her some hair." "What color was her hair?" "A yellow," Eleanor whispered. Like sunshine. A yellow like sunshine," Augusta repeated. Excellent choice." She looked at Thomas. "I shall need an assistant. Someone with steady hands to hold the patient still." Thomas stared at her, his suspicion warring with a desperate desire to fix what he had broken. Augusta did not press. She simply placed the doll carefully in her mending basket and went back to her knitting. She had planted a seed. Now she had to wait for it to grow. That evening, as she was working on the ledgers in the study, Maxwell spoke. "Gable tells me you are cleaning the conservatory. It was dirty," Augusta replied without looking up. She tells me the children spoke to you." They did. "And that you have taken possession of Eleanor's doll." At this, she did look up. "I have taken it for repairs." "It is a delicate operation," checked Dean. He was watching her, his expression a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that might have been gratitude. 3 governesses have tried to take that doll from her, to replace it. They all left with scratches, for their trouble. They did not understand," Augusta said simply. You do not replace what is loved, you mend it." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. She was not just talking about the doll, they both knew it. Men do not always care to be seen, but in that moment, Maxwell felt a profound, unsettling sense of being understood. This quiet, sensible woman saw the broken things in his house, and instead of trying to throw them away, she was gathering up the pieces. The next afternoon, when Augusta went to the conservatory, she found a small, carefully wrapped package on the table beside her chair. It contained a spool of the finest silk thread, a square of soft linen, and a skein of embroidery, floss, the exact color of a summer daffodil. There was no note. There did not need to be. When the children appeared at the nursery door, she was already at work. She had fashioned a new head for the doll, stuffing it firmly with clean cotton waste. Now, with the yellow floss, she was carefully embroidering a cheerful, smiling face. Eleanor watched, transfixed. Thomas stood behind her, pretending not to care, but Augusta could see his reflection in the glass, his eyes wide with interest. She worked in silence, letting the quiet industry do the talking. When the face was done, she attached the head to the body with tiny, invisible stitches. The doll, Annabelle, was whole again, different, but whole. She held it out to Eleanor. The little girl took it, her hands trembling. She looked at the new, smiling face, then up at Augusta, and for the first time since Augusta had arrived, a tiny, watery smile touched Elinara's own lips. She hugged the doll to her chest, and, without another word, ran back into the nursery. Thomas remained. He walked over to the table and picked up the leftover piece of linen. You are very good at that," he said gruffly. My mother taught me," Augusta said. She said, mending things was a kind of magic. Is that why you are here? He asked, his voice suddenly small. To do magic? Am here because your father and I have made a bargain. She said, giving him the same honesty she had given his father. But I hope, in time, we might also be friends. He considered this, his brow furrowed. The dogs like you. Yes. And you once scared a father? Augusta allowed herself a small smile. No. And you fixed Annabelle? Yes. He seemed to come to a decision. He pointed to the book she had been reading yesterday. The dry text on agricultural husbandry. Is that a real book? It is. Will you read it to me? It was not the request she had been expecting. Not a storybook, not an adventure tale. A treatise on crop rotation and soil management. But she understood. He did not want to be treated like a child. He wanted to be treated like his father's son. The heir! Of course, she said. Pull up a chair. And so, in the pale afternoon sun, with the great dogs snoring at their feet, Augusta began to read to the Duca's son about the proper way to manage an estate. It was, in its own way, the most romantic story he had ever heard. It was a story about roots and growth and the patient work of tending to the future. When Maxwell came looking for them an hour later, drawn by the unprecedented sound of a voice reading in the conservatory, this is what he found. His son, who argued with every tutor, sitting rapt, listening to a chapter on drainage. His daughter in the nursery doorway, whispering to her newly mended doll. And Augusta, her voice, calm and steady, breathing life back into his world, one sensible sentence at a time. He retreated, unseen, his heart pounding with a terrifying emotion. It was not grief. It was not anger. It was hope, and it felt dangerously like falling. The small pockets of peace Augusta created began to coalesce. The conservatory became neutral ground, a place where the children would emerge from the nursery, and Augusta would look up from her book or her mending and speak to them as if their presence was both expected and welcome. Thomas started asking questions about the ledgers, his sharp mind grasping the complex figures with an aptitude that impressed her. Eleanor remained mostly silent, but she would sit close by, her repaired doll Annabelle always in her arms, and listen. The household staff watched with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. Mrs. Spate. Gable remained a bastion of chilly disapproval. But cook started saving Augusta the warmest scones, and one of the younger maids, a girl named Sarah, began leaving a freshly cut flower in a small vase in her room each morning. The house was still cold, but there were now islands of warmth in it, and they were all centered around Augusta. Her relationship with Maxwell remained one of polite, professional distance, conducted mostly across the vast expanse of the dining table or the even vaster expanse of his study desk. Yet, the nature of their conversations shifted. He began to ask her opinion, first on matters of the estate, then on small household decisions. The tenant at West Farm complains of a leaking roof," he said one evening, pushing a letter across the desk to her. My steward recommends patching it." Again, Augusta read the letter, then pulled out the main estate ledger. She ran her finger down a column. You have patched that roof 4 times in the last 2 years, at a cost of £20. A new roof is quoted at 50. From a purely financial perspective, it would be more sensible to replace it. He looked at the figures, then at her, and my father would say, "That is coddling them." Your father is not trying to make a living under a leaking roof," Augusta replied calmly. "A secure tenant is a productive tenant. It is not coddling, Your Grace. It is a sound investment." He authorized the new roof. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the house began to change. Fires were lit in the drawing rooms, not just the study. The heavy velvet curtains were pulled back to let in the winter light. Cook, emboldened by Augusta's interest, started baking the lemon cakes the late Duchess had loved, and no one told her to stop. Augusta found a book of the late Duchess's favorite music and began playing it softly on the dusty pianoforte in the evenings. She played simply, without flourish, the melodies filling the quiet spaces. Maxwell would sit in his chair, pretending to read, but she knew he was listening. She was not erasing his wife's memory, she was allowing it to breathe. She was showing his children and him that memory could be a comfort, not just a source of pain. The first true crisis came in the form of a storm. Not a metaphorical one, but a real, howling northeaster that blew in from the sea, rattling the windows of Stratton House and plunging the coast into a fury of wind and rain. In the middle of the night, a clap of thunder, so loud it shook the foundations, woke the entire household. Augusta sat up in bed, her heart pounding. The dogs, who slept on a rug by her hearth, were on their feet, whining softly. And then she heard a child's scream, thin and terrified, cut short. Eleanor. Augusta was out of bed in an instant, pulling on a dressing gown. She ran from her room, the dogs padding silently behind her. The hall was dark, but a flickering light came from the nursery. She found chaos. Mrs. Gable was trying to light a lamp with trembling hands. A young nursemaid was weeping in a corner. And Maxwell was there, holding a screaming, thrashing Eleanor in his arms. "T's all right, El. T's just thunder," he was saying, his voice strained and helpless. But the little girl was beyond reason, her small body rigid with terror. "Shay's been like this since the first clap," Mrs. Gable said, her face pale. "Nothing will calm her." Augusta took in the scene. The frightened adults, the panicked child, the storm raging outside. She walked calmly to the window and looked out at the lightning flashing over the churning sea. When I was a little girl," she said, her voice clear and steady over the din, "me father told me that thunder was the sound of angels playing bowls in heaven." Eleanor's screams subsided into hiccuping sobs. She peeked over her father's shoulder at Augusta. He said the lightning was when they scored a strike and they were lighting up the sky to see the pins fall. Augusta continued, her voice weaving a story in the chaotic room. And the rain was just the universe weeping with joy at such a good game. Maxwell was staring at her, his arms still tightly around his daughter. He had tried to reason with his child's fear. Augusta had given it a new name. Is that true?" Eleanor whispered, her voice tiny. "It is a story," Augusta said gently. "Would you like to watch the game with me?" As she held out her hand, Eleanor looked from Augusta's calm face to her father's strained one. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she untangled herself from her father's arms and slid to the floor. She walked over to Augusta and put her small, cold hand into hers. Together they stood by the window and watched the storm. Augusta kept up a soft commentary, naming the flashes of lightning for imagined angelic players. "Oh, a good shot from Gabriel. See how he lit up the whole sky." Thomas, who had been huddled in his bed, crept over to join them, his fear forgotten in his fascination with the story. Even Mrs. Gable and the maid fell silent, listening. Maxwell stood alone in the middle of the room, forgotten. He watched Augusta hold his daughter's hand, her presence a pool of calm in the storm. He had tried to command the fear away, she had transformed it. He was the Duke, the master of the house, the father, and in this moment of crisis, he had been utterly useless, and she, the stranger, the interloper, had been the one his children turned to. He felt a pang of something sharp and unfamiliar. It was not resentment, it was envy, and a profound, aching loneliness. He was the king of a castle. He did not know how to rule, the father of children. He did not know how to comfort. When the storm had passed, and the children were finally asleep, tucked into their beds, with a dog sleeping at the foot of each, Augusta found him in the study. The fire was nearly out and he was staring into the embers, the brandy decanter at his elbow. "Ah, they are asleep," she said softly from the doorway. He did not look at her. Thank you." The words were clipped, forced. They were frightened. And I was no help," he finished for her, his voice bitter. Their father. And I could do nothing. "Daughter, you are their father," she said, walking further into the room. "Ah, you are not expected to be their God. You cannot command the storms to cease. You can only teach them how to listen to the thunder, eh?" He looked up at her then, his face etched with a pain that was deeper than grief. It was the pain of failure. Their mother, she would have known what to do. She would have sung to them. She had a hymn for every fear. "And what were the hymns?" Augusta asked gently. He looked surprised. I don't remember. It has been so long. I just remember her voice." Augusta walked to the pianoforte in the corner of the study, an instrument she had never seen him touch. She lifted the lid. She thought for a moment. Then her fingers found the keys, and she began to play a simple, gentle melody, a familiar hymn. The day thou gavest, Lord, is ended." Maxwell watched her, his throat tight. It was one of the songs. He had not heard it in over a year, but his heart remembered it. She did not sing. She just played, the music filling the silence, a quiet prayer in the dark. It was not a performance. It was an offering. When she finished, the last note hung in the air, a perfect, shimmering thing. How did you know?" he whispered. Thomas," she said simply. He hums it in his sleep." She had been listening. In all the noise of his grief and the silence of his children, she had been listening. She had heard the song he had forgotten. He felt the wall he had built around his heart, the one he had thought so impenetrable, crack. A single hairline fracture. He crossed the room and stood behind her, his hand resting on the polished wood of the pianoforte. His fingers were inches from hers. He could feel the warmth radiating from her, the quiet strength. "I did not expect to care whether you stayed," he said, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. The words were a confession, a surrender. Augusta's hands were still on the keys. She did not look at him. It is what I thought I asked," she replied, her own voice unsteady. "Not for a performance, not for a lie, for a partnership." The air between them was thick with things unsaid. The bargain they had made, a cold contract of convenience, was melting in the warmth of the fire, in the shared intimacy of the late hour. He had offered her a title. She was offering him his family back. The moment was broken by a sudden sharp rapping at the front door. It was nearly 3 in the morning. A visitor at this hour could only mean one thing: disaster. They looked at each other, the spell shattered. Maxwell, his face once more a mask of ducal authority, went to answer it himself. A moment later he returned a sealed document in his hand. His face was pale, his expression grim. It is from my late wife's uncle," he said, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. It is a formal petition to the court. He is suing for custody of the children." The first stage was over. The cruel aunts and the social slights were children's games. The true threat had arrived. The war for Stratton had begun. The legal document was a declaration of war. It was filled with florid language about the sacred memory of his beloved Nisa and his solemn duty to her orphaned issue. It painted Maxwell as a neglectful, grief-stricken recluse, unfit to raise his own children. It cited the rapid turnover of governesses, the children as withdrawn state, and the Duca's own reclusive behavior as evidence of an unsuitable environment. The uncle, Sir Jasper Thorne, proposed himself as the ideal guardian, a man of steady habits and sound financial standing, who would manage the children's considerable inheritance until their majority. "He is a vulture," Maxwell said, his voice a low growl. He paced the study like a caged animal. He cared nothing for Eleanora's mother when she was alive. He saw her as a pawn to be married off. Now he sees her children as a bank vault to be plundered. Augusta read the document carefully, her face calm. Her training in her aunt's house had taught her to read the spaces between the words. The petition was clever. It was all insinuation and righteous concern. Difficult to refute without appearing defensive. He mentions the instability of the household, she said, pointing to a line, and the introduction of a unvetted strangers into the children's lives. He means you, Maxwell said, stopping his pacing to look at her. My father's attempts to marry me off have given him the perfect weapon. He will paint you as the latest in a line of fortune-hunting adventuresses. The cruelty of it struck her. She had come here to help, to build something from the ruins, and she was to be cast as the villain, the homewrecker. It was her aunt's accusations, writ large on a legal document. You are a fool, Augusta. A plain, bookish fool. This is my fault, Maxwell said, sinking into a chair, his head in his hands. I was so lost in my own grief, I left the gates unguarded. I let him see a weakness. Augusta folded the document and placed it on the desk. She looked at him, not with pity, but with a calm resolve. Then we will show him strength. He looked up, surprised by her tone. How? He has lawyers' connections. He will drag my wife's memory through the mud. He will put my children on display in a courtroom. No, Augusta said, her voice firm. He will try, but he will not succeed. Because his entire case is built on a foundation of lies. And we have the truth. She tapped the stack of ledgers on her corner of the desk. And we have the numbers. Over the next few weeks, the study became a war room. Augusta, with her head for figures and her meticulous attention to detail, became Maxwell's chief strategist. Together they worked late into the night, poring over estate documents, accounts, and correspondence, building their defense. She was no longer just a potential duchess or a glorified governess. She was his partner, his ally, his equal. She showed him how Sir Jasper, as a trustee, had consistently approved high-risk, low-yield investments for the children's funds, while his own portfolio thrived. She unearthed letters from tenants that showed Sir Jasper's own agent had been demanding exorbitant fees. She created a clear, concise financial summary that demonstrated not neglect on Maxwell's part, but a pattern of predatory behavior on Sir Jasper's. She was brilliant. And Maxwell, watching her work, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her face lit up when she found a key piece of evidence, felt a burgeoning admiration that was dangerously close to awe. He had asked for a shield. He had been given a general. While Augusta managed the legal battle, she did not neglect the domestic one. She knew that the true battlefield would not be the courtroom, but the hearts of the children. She continued her patient, quiet campaign to win them over. She taught Thomas how to fish in the stream that ran through the estate, and praised his patience. She discovered Eleanor had a sweet, true singing voice, and encouraged her to sing to the birds in the garden, far from the judging ears of the house. She brought life back to the neglected gardens, not by ordering the gardeners, but by working alongside them, her hands in the dirt. She planted a section with herbs, explaining to an interested Eleanor that some plants are for beauty, and some are for use, and some, the very best ones, are for both. One afternoon, as she was weeding a bed of lavender, her aunt arrived. Lady Honoria Plumtree descended on Stratton House like a blight. She had heard rumors of Augusta's astonishing engagement and had come to see for herself, her face a mask of false affection that did not hide the avarice in her eyes. My dearest Augusta," she cried, enveloping her in a cloud of cloying perfume. To think, a duchess. I always knew you had it in you." Augusta stiffened, her hands still covered in soil. "Aunt Honoria, this is a surprise." "I have come to help you, my dear. You are a clever girl, but you know nothing of running a house like this. You will need guidance." It was a blatant power play, an attempt to install herself as the true mistress of Stratton. Over the next few days, she swept through the house, criticizing Augusta's simple dresses, questioning her menus, and attempting to countermand her orders to the staff. She was particularly venomous about the children. "Oh, they are positively feral, my dear," she confided to Augusta, loud enough for the hovering Mrs. Gable to hear. "Oh, you are far too soft on them. A firm hand is what is required." She tried to take over, but she found her authority strangely blunted. The staff, who had initially been loyal to the rigid hierarchy Mrs. Gable represented, now looked to Augusta. When Lady Honoria demanded the pianoforte be tuned for her own use, the butler informed her that her Grace prefers it, as it is when she tried to dismiss the maid who had been leaving flowers for Augusta. Cook stood in the kitchen doorway, cleaver in hand, and suggested she reconsider. The house, which had been a collection of individuals, had become a household, and it had chosen its mistress. The final confrontation came at dinner. Lady Honoria, frustrated at her inability to gain a foothold, turned her attack on the children directly. Maxwell, you simply must do something about that boy," she said, waving her fork at the Duke. I saw him today, covered in mud, with a fishing rod." "A fishing rod. He is the heir to a duchy, not a common Fermaris boy." Before Maxwell could reply, Thomas, who was now allowed to dine with the adults once a week, spoke up. "Augusta taught me," he said, his voice clear. She said a duke should know his own land, not just what it looks like from a carriage." Lady Honoria's lips thinned. She turned her attention to Eleanor and the girl. "She does nothing but whisper to that dreadful doll. You should take it from her. It is morbid." Eleanor shrank in her seat, clutching Annabel tighter. Augusta placed a reassuring hand on the childa's arm. Annabel is her friend," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. And this house has had a shortage of friends." Nonsense," Lady Honoria scoffed. She is a companion. A thing of cloth and thread, like some people I could name." Pursed. The insult was aimed directly at Augusta, a reminder of her former status. Augusta met her aunt's gaze across the table. The years of small cruelties, of being made to feel worthless and invisible, rose up in her. But instead of anger, she felt a profound pity. Her aunt's world was so small, so circumscribed by bitterness and envy. "You are right," Aunt Augusta said, her voice calm and clear, silencing the table. Was a companion. I spent 20 years learning how to be useful, how to be quiet, how to mend what is broken, and how to endure. I learned to see what people need, not just what they want. It was not the education you intended for me, but I have come to find it is the most valuable one a woman can have." She looked at Maxwell, a silent communication passing between them. I believe it is the very reason I am here." It was a declaration of independence, spoken not with shouting, but with the unshakable force of self-knowledge. Lady Honoria was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had come expecting to find the same meek, downtrodden niece she had bullied for years. She had found a duchess. She left the next morning. The first stage of the war was over. Augusta had routed the enemy. But the final battle was yet to come. The day of the hearing dawned gray and overcast, a perfect mirror for Augusta's mood. She stood before the mirror in her room, dressed in a simple dark gray gown. It was the most respectable, unassuming dress she owned. It was armor. Today, she was not a duchess-in-waiting. She was a witness, a defendant, a woman on trial. Over the past weeks, the house had rallied around her. The staff moved with a quiet, determined efficiency. The children were on their best behavior, sensing the tension. Thomas had presented her with his prize fishing lure for good luck. Eleanor had picked a single perfect white rose from the newly revived garden and tucked it into a vase on her dressing table. Small, silent gestures of loyalty. Maxwell was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs. He, too, was dressed in sober dark colors. The weight of the day was etched on his face, but as he saw her, his expression softened. He looked at the simple gown, the hair pulled back in its neat, sensible bun. She was not trying to be anything. She was not. She was simply Augusta. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. No, she said with a frankness that made him almost smile. But I am prepared." He held out his arm. So are we." Auditor. R. The courtroom was a bare pit of wood paneling, high windows, and whispers. Sir Jasper Thorne sat with his lawyers, looking smug and pious. He nodded to Maxwell with a look of false sympathy that made Augusta's stomach turn. Society was there in force, eager to see the proud Duke of Stratton humbled, to get a glimpse of the mysterious children and the plain-faced woman who had somehow ensnared him. The proceedings began. Sir Jasper's lawyer was smooth and eloquent. He painted a picture of a house of sorrow, a father lost in grief, and children left to run wild. He called witness after witness, saw dismissed governesses, who spoke of a hostile, silent boy and a strange, withdrawn girl. He even called Mrs. Gable, who, under oath, spoke of the Duke's long absences in his study and the unsettling quiet of the house before Miss Finch's arrival. It was all true, and yet it was all a lie. When it was Maxwell's turn, his own lawyer tried to counter, but the damage was done. The judge, a stern-faced man with little patience for aristocratic dramas, was looking increasingly grim. Finally, Sir Jasper's lawyer called Augusta to the stand. Miss Finch," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. You came into this household a mere 2 months ago. Is that correct?" Yes, you were, I believe. A paid companion to your aunt, Lady Honoria Plumtree. Yes, a woman of no fortune and no connections, and yet we are told you are now to be the next Duchess of Stratton. A remarkable rise in station. Tell me, Miss Finch, what are your qualifications for raising the children of a duke?" He was trying to paint her as a gold digger, an opportunist. Augusta looked not at him, but at the judge. My only qualification, sir," she said, her voice clear and steady, "is that I love them." A murmur went through the courtroom. Sir Jasper's lawyer smiled. He had her. He sneered. "A convenient emotion for a woman in your position. But let us speak of more practical matters. Let us speak of the children's inheritance. Are you familiar with the Stratton estate finances?" I am." "And you believe you are competent to manage such a complex portfolio?" I am competent at arithmetic," Augusta said simply. I am competent at telling the truth. I have reviewed the accounts of the Children's Trust, which Sir Jasper has managed for the past year." She turned to the judge. Your Honor, with your permission, I should like to present my findings." And she did. With the file of papers she had brought, she calmly, methodically, and devastatingly dismantled Sir Jasper's reputation as a sound financial manager. She showed the high-risk investments, the sweetheart deals with his own companies, the commissions and fees that had been bleeding the children's inheritance dry. She did not use emotional language. She used numbers. She used facts. And they were damning. The courtroom was silent. Sir Jasper's face had gone from smug to ashen. His lawyer was shuffling his papers, his smooth facade crumbling. When she was finished, Augusta looked at the judge. Sir Jasper speaks of protecting the children's future. It seems to me he has been treating their future as his own personal bank. The lawyer, desperate, tried one last attack. This is a smokescreen, a fabrication by an ambitious woman trying to secure her position. She has bewitched the Duke. She has turned the children against their own blood. They are terrified of her. Ask them. It was a fatal mistake." The judge looked down at Maxwell. Your Grace, are your children present?" In an ante-room," Maxwell said, his voice tight. "I did not wish to subject them to this." Bring in the boya," the judge commanded. A bailiff returned a moment later with Thomas. He was small and pale in the vast courtroom, but he walked with his head held high. He looked at his father and then at Augusta. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. The judge leaned forward. "A son, Do not be afraid. Just tell me the truth. Are you happy in your father's house?" Thomas looked at Sir Jasper, a man he had only met at his mother's funeral, a man who had given him a clammy handshake and told him to be brave. Then he looked at Augusta, who had taught him how to tie a fly and read a ledger. "I am now," he said, his voice ringing out in the silence. The judge softened. "And this woman, Miss Finch. Are you afraid of her?" Thomas looked indignant. "Afraid of Augusta? Why would I be? She's the one who fixed everything." Sir Jasper's lawyer threw his hands up in despair. His case was in ruins. But the judge had one more question. He looked at the file. It says here your sister Eleanor does not speak." Thomas's face fell. She does, sometimes. When she's not scared." "And what is she scared of?" Before Thomas could answer, a small commotion came from the back of the courtroom. The door to the anteroom had opened, and Eleanor was standing there, her repaired doll clutched in her hand. She had heard her name. She had heard them talking about her. She looked at the sea of strange faces, at the stern judge, at her pale great-uncle. Her face crumpled, and a tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She looked about to bolt. Then she saw Augusta on the witness stand. Augusta, looking at her with such love and encouragement. Eleanor took a deep breath. She walked, step by tiny step, to the front of the courtroom. She stopped before the judge's bench and held up her doll. "Augusta fixed her," she said, her voice small but clear. She mends things." Then she turned, walked to the witness stand, and without a word, climbed into Augusta's lap, buried her face in her shoulder, and held on tight. It was the most eloquent testimony the court had ever heard. The room erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel for order, but he was smiling. He looked at Sir Jasper, his expression like ice. Sir, I believe I have heard enough. Petition denied. And I would suggest you prepare for a thorough investigation of your handling of the Stratton Trust." It was over. They had won. Maxwell was the first to reach her. He helped her down from the stand, his hand warm and firm on her arm. He didn't say a word. He just looked at her, his eyes full of 1,000 emotions she couldn't begin to name. He looked at her and then at his daughter, who was still clinging to her, and a single tear escaped and traced a path down his own cheek. He was not the only one to declare his allegiance. That night, after the children were tucked in, to May chattering excitedly about the trial, Eleanor humming a quiet song to Annabella Maxwell, found Augusta in the study. The room was quiet, the fire crackling in the hearth. The two great dogs lay before it, their heads on their paws. The battle was over, and the house was at peace. Augusta was standing by the window, looking out at the moonlit garden. "A wee one," she said softly. "No," Maxwell said, coming to stand beside her. "A you one." He took her hands. They were not soft or delicate. They were capable, strong hands that had balanced ledgers and mended dolls, and held his world together. "I made a bargain with you, Augusta," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I asked for a duchess, a shield, a signature on a piece of paper. I offered you a title and a cold house. I was a fool." He turned her to face him, his gray eyes searching hers. "Oz, you are the heart of this house. You brought it back to life. You brought my children back to me. You brought me back to myself." His voice dropped to a whisper. The bargain is over. I don't want a partner in business. I don't want an ally in a war. I want a wife, my wife. I want you, Augusta. If you will have me Augusta's heart was pounding. This was the moment, the truth. But fear, the old familiar companion, whispered in her ear. Do not say it if it is only gratitude, Maxwell. I could not bear that." He smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his face, chasing away the last of the shadows. "Gratitude, my dear. I have been in a state of gratitude since the moment my dogs lay down at your feet. What I feel now is something far more terrifying and far more wonderful." He gently touched the white rose in the vase on the table, the one Eleanor had picked for her. A you came into a house full of silence and taught it how to sing again. You looked at a garden full of weeds and saw the roses. You looked at a broken man and two broken children, and you did not try to replace what was lost. You mended it. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. Love you, Augusta Finch. Not because you are sensible, or capable, or good with numbers, although you are all of those things. I love you because you are kind, and because you are true, and because you stayed. She stayed, the two words that summed up her entire life. She had stayed through her Antau's cruelty, through the cold silence of this house, through the fear and the uncertainty. She had stayed, and it had led her here, home. A single tear of her own, a tear of pure, unadulterated joy, slipped down her cheek. "I love you too, Maxwell," she whispered, and when he kissed her, it was not a bargain, or a contract, or a performance. A homecoming, a beginning. Months later, on a bright summer morning, the Duchess of Stratton stood in her garden. The roses were in full bloom, their scent heavy and sweet on the air. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the lawn, where the Duke was engaged in a very undignified game of chase with his son and daughter, the two wolfhounds loping happily alongside them. The house was full of light and noise and life. The ledgers were balanced, the tenants were happy, and the memory of the late Duchess was a gentle, loving presence, not a haunting one. Her portrait still hung in the great hall, and Eleanor often left a fresh flower beneath it. Augusta placed a hand on her stomach, a gentle curve that was just beginning to show. She smiled. Some plants are for beauty, and some are for use, and some, the very best ones, are for both. Maxwell caught her eye from across the lawn. He stopped his game, and his smile was just for her, a look of such love and adoration it made her heart sing. He had inherited more debts of feeling than of money, and with Augusta's help, he had become a very rich man indeed. She had come to Stratton House as part of a bargain, a sensible solution to a practical problem, a woman the world had overlooked. But here, in this house, she had been seen, she had been valued, she had been loved. She was not a replacement, she was not a convenience, she was the woman who stayed.